The spirit of exploration lives in every child.
We all begin our lives curious.
National Geographic is dedicated to empowering the next generation.
Simon says, leap like a lemur to Madagascar.
We bring the world to classrooms.
These first-hand experiences really allow students to feel that connection with their world.
We turn kids into explorers.
I get to be the scientist. I get to be the explorer.
We inspire a community of educators.
Being a fellow, it gave me more resources to come back to my classroom and be more inspiring for my students.
We're building a better future.
Whoa, what's this?
One curious mind at a time.
I work with kids in 1st through 3rd grades, and they are inherently curious. My students have completed geo-inquiry projects before, so they understand the power of asking questions. And so they asked, why are parts of the playground always muddy? Why can't we play near the jungle gym today? These are big problems to a 1st grader. Well, here's why. Rain causes groundwater to rise to the surface, creating waterlogged conditions around the school. The drainage issue is due to our school's location in the watershed. Technically, the school has created a swamp by preventing stormwater from reaching a nearby creek. Not only does this issue prevent students from using parts of the playground, it threatens trees and shrubs that aren't adapted to growing in water-saturated soils. Simple, innocuous questions launched a meaningful student-led project to develop a sustainable watershed that will reduce stormwater from standing on school grounds. So my students inquired about our school's watershed. The local soil conservation office, they purchased Enviroscapes, interactive environmental models to illustrate the overall watershed concept. My students collected water samples along trails at Lost River Cave in southern Kentucky. They analyzed how the environment naturally removes pollutants from the water, and they determined the best soil for plant growth. Students visualized the reason water stands around our school by working with university professors on using geographic information systems. My kids used a 3D printer to create models of our school's topography. Students took the models and a presentation to the school board, whose members now support our mission to reduce the amount of water standing around the playground. Since then, a landscape company has built a stone wall around near our school to prevent water from entering the building. My students are now collaborating with the Future Farmers of America on planting flowers that will absorb some of the water while also creating a rich ecosystem containing butterflies and other pollinators. This effort and all its progress began with the single 3-letter word, why. Not every question warrants research, professional expertise, and community partnerships, but that shouldn't stop you and your students from using geo-inquiry to pursue passions and explore the world. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Shakinya Humphreys. I'm a local educator at the Washington School for Girls. My students want to be change makers, and I help them explore their interests and articulate their thoughts. In order to spark curiosity and engagement, I use a cross-curricular approach where I align field trip experiences with their reading and writing assignments. I try to align it to what they're learning in social studies, Spanish, and other content areas. And the literature provides a broader context to what they're studying, and the experience connects them to real-world examples. Those experiences bring the literature to life and not only help them remember the topics, but to understand them. A few years ago, I had a student named Alyssa. Alyssa was a great test taker, a smart girl, a reader, but she was not the first student to raise her hand or to share her voice. After a complex and collaborative unit on water crisis issues on the Danube River and at the local Anacostia River, Alyssa and some of the other students brainstormed ways to really help the environment and presented essays. Their advocacy did not stop there. They got together and thought about ways they could support cleaning the Anacostia River. Alyssa decided to start a recycling program at our school that still exists today. And we planned field trips to other water sources and to local areas to really figure out what we could do for the issue. She became an especially strong advocate for recycling and really learned to share her voice. If I've learned anything from Alyssa or students like Alyssa, it's that it's important to let students' natural inclinations guide their learning. Alyssa was always a good student, but that year she became a leader. And I was so excited to be a part of her journey and to empower students like Alyssa to really share and lift their voice. Thank you so much for letting me share.
My students are advocates against climate change. My journey with National Geographic as a certified educator, Grosvenor Teacher Fellow, and Education Fellow has empowered me to teach these students differently so they can think beyond their classroom and their grades. When students learned about plastic pollution, and they realized that most of the plastic that we think is being recycled is sent overseas, they wanted a better way to keep plastics out of the oceans. They partnered with a local plastic recycling, they call it upcycling because they repurpose it into hydrocarbons for commercial purposes. My students are collecting film plastic in our community. They are partnering with a 5-year-old Girl Scout troop. These girls got so inspired by the high schoolers that they are starting an environmental club at their elementary school. You see, this is impact because this is not a project. This is a lifestyle and a mindset that will last through these high schoolers and these young Girl Scouts as they embark on adulthood, become voting citizens, and tomorrow's members of this society. My students are tackling the issue of climate change head-on. They are organizing a youth climate summit. During this day-long event, over 500 students will learn from the subject matter experts, our very own National Geographic explorers, and will attend many breakout sessions. In one such session, they will hear about the research from the students who are being impacted, the coastal areas, from Galapagos and from Florida. My students are not waiting. They are taking action today. If my students can, yours can too. Please join us in our action against climate change. Thank you.
Please welcome Lena Gomez, Vice President of Strategy and Operations, Education Programs, National Geographic Society.
Good evening, and welcome to National Geographic. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our campus, whether you're here in the auditorium or joining us via live stream. Hello. I have to say, I have one of the best jobs ever. I have the incredible privilege of working alongside educators, students, and National Geographic explorers around the world to foster geographic education in a really compelling way. It's one of the reasons I love coming into work every day, because really, where else can you go home at the end of the day and tell your family about discovering sharks in an underwater volcano in the South Pacific? Some call it a sharkano. This is not a campy summer blockbuster. It's a real-world phenomenon. A couple years ago, scientists supported by National Geographic went to study one of the most active underwater volcanoes on Earth. While testing drop cam technology, they found sharks living inside a volcano. But for me, One of the most compelling things about this discovery was when expedition leader and National Geographic explorer Brennan Phillips said, "This finding opens up all kinds of questions. There are infinite directions in which we can go." This resonated with me. Brennan was inspired. He was curious. He was engaged. He could explore a whole new world of possibilities. And this is the basis of what geographic education means to us at the Society. It's the basis for National Geographic's learning framework, a learning framework that celebrates curiosity, critical thinking, and engagement. It's a framework that aims to open a world of possibilities for millions of students across the country. We want to inspire students to think like an explorer. And our historic commitment to geographic education dates back decades, championed most notably by our former president, Gil Grosvenor. He launched an ambitious effort to improve geographic education in our nation's classrooms. Today, we're building on Gil's legacy with our first ever National Geographic Education Summit. Earlier today, we assembled a remarkable gathering of bold individuals who share our deep commitment to education, to foster collaboration, learn from one another, and generate new ideas, to ignite the spirit of exploration for the next generation. Now, tonight is an opportunity for you to be inspired by amazing educators, like we just heard, but also to immerse yourself in the breadth and depth of National Geographic's education programs, aimed at building geographic competency so we can prepare our up-and-coming leaders to become informed decision makers, global citizens, and compassionate stewards of our planet. While we have a number of valued partners joining us tonight, I'd also like to take a moment to recognize one in particular, an amazing organization we announced a new partnership with just last week, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. By joining forces, we will expand the reach of National Geographic's learning activities through Mott's 50-state after-school network, which serves millions of students throughout the United States. Together, we aim to inspire, educate, and empower kids in after-school programs and to help them explore potential career paths. Now, we're also fortunate to have stellar leadership at National Geographic, including National Geographic Society's new president and CEO, Tracy Wollstonecraft. Tracy joined us this month, but he's been part of the National Geographic family for a decade, serving on our board of trustees, and before that, the International Council of Advisors. He brings a profound understanding of the role that National Geographic must play in this world, and he believes deeply in the power of education and the need to create the next generation of planetary stewards. We couldn't be more thrilled to have him at the helm of our organization. Please help me welcome Tracy Wollstonecraft.
Lena, thank you for those very generous and warm welcome, and I'm so excited to be here. The energy in this room is really outstanding. I want to thank all of you for coming and being part of our first summit. You know, I must say, as Lena said, I've been here about a month, and it didn't take me long to figure out where the real power of National Geographic lies. We moved here. Our youngest is a junior in high school, and she was approached, as you would imagine, you know, who's this new kid? And the second or third day, one of the kids said, "So what are you doing here?" She said, "Well, my dad moved down. We moved down with my dad. He's going to be at National Geographic." And the kids leaned in and said, "Is he an explorer? Is he a photographer?" She said, "No, he's the CEO." They said, "Oh, Oh, that's too bad. So, you know, any shot I had of convincing my daughter this was a good thing just went way down inside National Geographic. But look, I am enormously proud to be part of a community that is making such a profound impact in the world. It's a community of change makers that are comprised of explorers, as you've heard tonight, and as all of you know, of scientists, passionate storytellers, but most importantly tonight for educators. And I have 3 topics that I'd like to discuss with you tonight. The first is a brief history of education at the National Geographic Society. The second is geographic competency and the importance of understanding it around us every single day. And then lastly, National Geographic's vision for a planet in balance and how education and all that you do is a critical partnership in achieving that vision. So let's begin briefly with some historical context. It won't surprise any of you in the room to know that National Geographic education is an important and critical part of our DNA. Our very founding 130 years ago was grounded in this very premise to understand our world and all that's in it. And remember, our founders' charge in 1888 was to increase and diffuse geographic knowledge. The early soul of our institution may be no better expressed than the words of Gil Grosvenor's grandfather, a gentleman who was the first full-time editor of the magazine, who served in that role from 1897 to 1954. Is that extraordinary? He said, it's one of my favorite quotes. I remember coming across this in my early days on the board. He said, "A map is the greatest of all epic poems. Its lines and colors show the realization of great dreams." And that just grabbed me from the first time I heard it. So consider this global map that appeared in the magazine in 1896. I'll just point out, the title of this is cut off, but these are the red lines between North America and Europe are quite interesting. They are lines that are describing the submarine blade telephone cable lines between North America and Europe. It's an important little footnote because a gentleman by the name of Alexander Graham Bell was at the table founding National Geographic in 1888. And I'm just guessing he might have had an interest in this being one of the first maps that occurred in National Geographic magazine. But look at this map a bit more closely. It's a window into a world and age of empires. Look at the upper right, the Russian Empire. Just beneath it, the Chinese Empire. And look at just look at the poles. They're just poking up in the south. It's an age of exploration. The poles are not fully represented because, frankly, they hadn't been mapped. And no one is thinking about melting polar ice caps. The depths of the oceans have yet to be understood. It's important to know, by the way, there are no cables running between the United States and Asia. Today, I would guess there's more cables between the United States and Asia than between us and Europe. But the depths of the oceans yet to be understood, and no one is thinking to consider the importance of deep water, cold currents as it relates to the entire planetary ecosystem. Everest had yet to be surveyed, and no one was considering the far-reaching impacts of the greater Himalaya mountain range as a source of water today for over 2.5 billion people. But if you want to understand the forces of history, politics, language, culture, you have to command a grasp of geographic competency. You have to have a command and knowledge of the human and physical systems that power our planet. Geography is all around us. It is critical to not only answer the question of where, but why there, and what's the impact of it being there. So consider the following headlines. Geography is resources, industries, and economies, such as China's Belt and Road Initiative, an infrastructure link that can connect dozens of countries across the world. This is China's Marshall Plan. Make no mistake, this is their Marshall Plan. And if you do not understand geography, you will not understand the context in which China is moving and how it will change the power of China across the global map. Geography is the toll we are taking on our environment and the devastating impacts to our ecosystems. We're all familiar with plastics. There's a plastic bag found at the bottom of the world's deepest ocean trench. Geography is the challenges facing our natural world, such as the fate of our wildlife and wild places, and understanding the tools we need to save them. Geography is us, our human story, the challenges and sorrows such as the millions of refugees who are suffering around the world. Geography is our very future, the unprecedented stresses we are placing on our resources and species. Our world grows more interconnected and more complicated by the day, and understanding these systems has illuminated an unavoidable reality. Our planet is at a crossroads. Today, our ultimate goal of the National Geographic Society is to achieve a planet in balance, one that provides for humanity as well as the millions of species with which we share planet Earth. No question, this will be our greatest challenge of the 21st century. Said another way, for 130 years, we helped explore and explain the world. And now we need to help save and protect our world. As one of the most trusted scientific organizations, National Geographic provides access to explore, understand, and protect our planet as never before. And I consider this a fundamental act of stewardship and one of our greatest responsibilities at the Society. To deliver on this mission, expand our efforts, and make an even greater impact, we are deeply committed to working with strategic partners, including like-minded individuals, corporations, foundations, and others, because we know the ability to drive change grows exponentially when we bring great minds and great ideas together. That said, there is perhaps no partner more powerful than educators. You are the bold individuals who will cultivate geographic competency. You are the bold individuals who will inspire students to value diverse perspectives and cultures, to understand how events around the world are interconnected, and to solve problems that transcend borders. Because once students are geographically competent, they can become globally engaged citizens. And globally engaged citizens are inspired to live in a world responsibly. And that is why everyone in this room is absolutely vital. For me personally, geographic education today gives so much hope for our students because it encompasses so much more than what my generation was taught. When I was growing up, geography was simply rote memorization. Capital of Bolivia was La Paz. Today, a lesson on Bolivia, and I had to know that for 1 microsecond to get it right on the 7th grade test. Today, a lesson on Bolivia cuts across multiple disciplines: history, science, art, language, sociology, economics, and so on. Today, we want people to know that Bolivia holds close to 50% of the world's lithium metal reserves. The metal that powers your cell phone and the electric car that you might have already, you will have within just a few years. So imagine, if you don't know that Bolivia has close to 50%, you will not watch Bolivia with the same eye as you would knowing that. You will watch, is China doing something with Bolivia? Why aren't we doing something with Bolivia? Right? Why is this person in power versus another person? You look at it differently. Today, we are fundamentally changing the way we connect with students so they can better understand our interconnected 24/7 world. As a global nonprofit, we invest in and empower our remarkable community of educators, scientists, explorers, and storytellers. We invest in passionate educators like Kavita Gupta, whom you heard from during the lightning. I would like to take Kavita's class before this is over. I'd also like to know what Kavita meant by the impossible hamburger or burger, whatever it was on that line. As you know, Kavita is a high school chemistry teacher in California. Through comprehensive education programs, we are providing educators like Kavita and all of you with the transformative tools, training, and resources needed to help students understand human and natural systems, cultivate empathy and understanding, and inspire action to ensure a healthy and sustainable future for all. I loved the way she captured it in describing her education experiences with National Geographic. Quote, "It will change the way you teach and it will change the way your students learn. I feel like a changed educator." I'm excited for you to hear about these programs in more detail this evening, as well as to continue to meet more people like Kavita and her colleagues, who are making countless contributions in communities across the country by igniting the spirit of exploration in students. To our educators, our fellows, our administrators, and all those who share our commitment to education, we thank you. And thank you for your tireless efforts to inspire students to be informed global citizens and compassionate stewards of our planet. So let me conclude with a few inspirational words from the legendary Jane Goodall. I love this quote. "Only if we understand will we care. Only if we care will we help. And if we help, and only if we help, shall all be saved." I know that educators and everyone in this room care deeply. And because you care, the rising generations will learn to understand, value, and protect our world. Together, we can all achieve a planet in balance. And now let me shift and say that it is really my privilege to introduce an education strategist who is working closely with the National Geographic Society to achieve our education goals. VICKI Phillips, who you have heard from throughout the day, was a force in Pennsylvania as superintendent of Lancaster's public schools and later as the state's Secretary of Education. I can tell you I've met Ed Brendel, who was the governor when she was in that position. He is a force of nature. Anyone around that table is equal to that. She went on to become superintendent of Portland's public schools in Oregon and then became director of education for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for nearly a decade. More personally, I've had the pleasure of meeting with VICKI during the past month in my new role here at Geographic. And what has struck me about VICKI is that the power of education allowed her to travel from her small town roots in Kentucky to the prominent positions that I just discussed. And I know as an educator, she looks at the world as though every student is sitting in the same classroom as she did when she was a little girl. She asked the question, how do we ignite that child's mind? How do we ignite their spirit and their conviction to want a meaningful difference in our world? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and please welcome VICKI Phillips.
Good evening. As Tracy so eloquently said, the world is full of complexities. Creating a planet in balance is so much bigger than any one of us. And the teachers in the room know this. Helping young people see themselves as part of something bigger is one of the greatest opportunities in our classrooms, our after-school programs, and in our communities. We all come to this work wanting to foster imagination and spark curiosity. We want young people to love learning, to seek knowledge, to create solutions that make the world a better place. Sometimes the curriculum in schools can feel really narrow, and sometimes education policy can exist in silos. But now, more than ever, when we need young people to learn the skills required to be good citizens in their communities and of the planet, we need to broaden our perspective and think in an interdisciplinary way. National Geographic can help. So why am I here? There's something special about what National Geographic is trying to do. A unique approach to teaching kids about the world and how it works. I'm impressed by the breadth and the depth of the resources, and like many of you here, share their mission of empowering young people to succeed. You know, every one of us has a personal story about how we got involved in education, and I'd like to tell you a part of mine. When I was still real small, my mom and stepfather got married and paid $500 in back taxes to buy a 4-room house with dirt floors and broken windows that sat on the farm we still own in Falls of Rough, Kentucky. We raised pigs, grew vegetables, and hunted for our supper. We had a hand pump in the house and an outhouse in the back. I grew up with a sense of what it's like to live in a rural place where you fend for yourself and look out for your neighbor. And one experience that shapes my work was my confusing path to college and the hard time I had when I got there. I made good grades in high school on rote memory and just rote learning. I was drilled in the small mechanics but never taught the big concepts. I was taught how to follow directions but not how to find my way if I got lost. I made it, but not in the normal way. I got to college because I had a high school classmate from an affluent family who thought I should have the same chances she did. I made it through college because I had professors who believed I had talent that wasn't showing up in that first bad grade they gave me. And I made it to and through college because of a driving curiosity and love of learning that began in my childhood. Whenever I had a free moment, after dinner in the warm weather, I'd go down the field, across the creek, and read a book in the nook of a tree. Oh, the places I went and the things I experienced while up in that tree. Through books, I experienced the wildebeest migration of the Serengeti, the building of a wall through Asia spanning more than 13,000 miles and taking 2,000 years to construct. And I went on world-changing sea voyages with explorer James Cook. But imagine if I could have seen those things outside the confines of my own imagination. I thought I knew what a wildebeest looked like from the descriptions I read. But what if I could have seen one? And how different would my learning experience have been if I could have witnessed the awe of 2 million wildebeest migrating over 1,800 miles in search of grass ripened by the rain, by watching it online? That's the power of National Geographic. I know each of you have a personal story of what brought you here tonight and what makes you care about the world. And each of you have a professional stake in the future of learning. Tonight, I hope you gain ideas and tools and inspiration that can help in your work. In many ways, National Geographic remains a well-kept secret. You'll see teachers on the stage tonight who've been informed and inspired by its ideas and resources, but so many more could benefit. And I want to applaud the leadership and education team here for the renewed effort to elevate that work and the commitment to put more young people on the path to being planetary stewards. And let's be clear, this is not a commercial. There's no set curriculum. Rather, these are ideas and resources that can lift and inspire every learning environment, from music performances to the books being read in English language arts to the projects undertaken in science class. Everything can be more relevant and rigorous when we relate it to making our planet stronger. And ultimately, it's about connectivity, how we relate to each other as people in our quest to solve the problems of our world. Let's have kids tell you some of what's happening.
National Geographic wants us to take risks,
To push boundaries.
to remain restless,
and to be pioneering in everything we do.
to go further.
And think like the explorers who came before us.
We do this through
Curiosity,
observation,
Communication.
Storytelling makes you care about something.
collaboration,
responsibility,
Kids actually have more power than adults.
empowerment.
And problem solving.
National Geographic,
taking us
further.
You know, that's exactly it. The big buckets of industry happening globally, from manufacturing to digital agriculture to healthcare to technology and more, require a set of contemporary skills that are universal and essential. We want to prepare kids for anything. We want to help them be undaunted by failure. We want to foster habits of learning that will last a lifetime. These aren't just good concepts or nice to haves. We want young people to see opportunities beyond their circumstances, to know jobs beyond their parents' experience, to have expectations that match their interests and passions. From elementary school onward, we can connect student learning to potential careers and to a world of possibility. Just watch what happens when a young person is inspired by an explorer.
I want to be a theoretical physicist, an oncologist,
an explorer.
My advice to students is to just start exploring this very moment.
Their passion is really exciting to see, and it really ties into that sort of childlike wonder we all need going forward as scientists.
Good morning. How y'all doing? Good. So who's ready to learn about black holes? Oh, yeah.
After I saw the presentation, I felt stronger and believed in myself more.
I want to welcome all of our classes joining us on screen. Okay, Erica, take it away.
Hey, everybody. I'm actually inside my submarine right now.
I think talking to classrooms is just as important as the work I do in the field.
Science is like my least favorite subject, but the way she taught us made it more interesting, and her demonstrations, they were fun to do.
I would say that if you believe in yourself and you strive to do something, it might take a long time, but eventually you'll get there.
Your dreams matter, even if you're the only one who understands them right now. You can be whatever you want, no matter who you are. There's nothing to stop you from being great.
A very intentional learning framework underpins all this, based on the belief in the power of science, exploration, education, and storytelling to change the world. To succeed in today's world, kids must respond to rapid change, understand connections, make informed decisions. They must be explorers. National Geographic's outlined the attitudes, the skills, and the knowledge that encompass an explorer mindset. And I think we can all agree with their belief that an informed, curious, and capable global citizen can make the world a better place. The depth, breadth, and flexibility of the resources available are extraordinary, and they're tested and adapted by educators in all types of classrooms. Most importantly, as you heard Tracy say, there's a new push to make these resources available for students and teachers in every learning environment and to inspire even more young people. The educators taking the stage tonight will talk about how they've benefited, but I want to flag a few programs that I've been impressed by and that I hope you will want to learn more about. The geo-inquiry process can be used by all educators to explain complex components, see patterns, and make connections that change their communities. There's a free online course and an array of case studies and tools to help teachers and youth use this unique lens to analyze space, place, and the interconnections between human and the natural world. National Geographic Educator Certification is a free professional development program for pre-K to 12 educators committed to inspiring that next generation of explorers, conservationists, and change makers. These educators engage in a three-part process to build knowledge, apply skills and activities they create, and develop a capstone project that tells the story of student learning, demonstrates professional growth, and inspires other educators. And the Geo-Challenge. This is one of the newest student experiences hosted by National Geographic. Students form teams and respond to a problem, challenge, or critical issue by using research, collaboration, creativity, and communication to create and present real-world solutions, just like National Geographic explorers. The 2018-19 Geo-Challenge, Tackling Plastic, invites students to investigate the urgent issue of plastic pollution in our waterways to make a direct contribution to bringing the planet in balance. And one of the things I love most about the National Geographic, and the kids love most, is that it's not just about the explorers who go out into the world pushing boundaries and making key discoveries, but it's also about the explorers who come into classrooms, whether in person or via satellite from a vessel in the South Pacific. Tonight, you have the remarkable opportunity to meet an explorer who traveled from Newfoundland, Canada, to be here with us. JUSTINE AMMENDOLIA is a marine biologist and National Geographic grantee currently working on a project to monitor plastics in the Atlantic subarctic. Earlier this year, National Geographic launched a multi-year initiative to reduce the amount of single-use plastic that enters the world's oceans. Doing so will not only benefit the thousands to potentially millions of marine animals that become entangled in, suffocated by, or ingest plastic each year, but will also contribute overall to the health of the planet's marine ecosystems and to all who rely upon them. Please give a warm welcome to a great explorer and one of my new heroes. Justine, come to the stage.
So hi everyone, my name is Justine AMMENDOLIA, and I'm a marine biologist and plastic pollution researcher. So basically, I study marine animals and garbage. Now, to be honest with you, I never thought all my degrees would actually lead me to become a professional garbage picker, but here I am. And the reason why I got interested in plastic pollution is because of the immensity of the issue. As a scientist, it's my passion to take these really big problems and break them up into smaller questions and find solutions to make our oceans a cleaner place. Now, growing up, I knew I wanted to become a marine biologist. So I went to college and I studied zoology. It was here where I met my lifelong mentor, Dr. Shoshana Jacobs, who happens to be an Arctic researcher. And upon going to one of her lectures, she offered me the opportunity to go up to the Arctic to study seabirds that summer. And it was during this experience where I stumbled upon the issue of plastic pollution for the first time. Now, with the support of the National Geographic Society, I was off to Cap Hoek, Eastern Greenland, and I was literally thrown into this world of problem solving. Right off the bat, I was expected to charter my own helicopter to get to a very remote field site to meet with 3 other researchers. And it was here where we basically stayed for 6 weeks in complete isolation, and we shared our field site with about 2 million seabirds. Now, the living conditions were quite rustic. We lived in an off-grid hunting cabin with no electricity, and we ate sardines and crackers every day and melted water from icebergs for drinking. But perhaps my favorite part was actually the washroom facilities, because as you can see, the toilet is perfectly situated in between 2 fjords and has a mountain range view. And you can say it was a little inspiring, so yeah. So the birds that I was studying were called little auks, and my project was simple. It was to take GPS trackers and stick them on the birds to see where they were getting their food in the ocean. But the catch was that when the birds came back to the colony, you had to remove the trackers so you could get the data. Now, everything with my project was going great, but at the end of the day, the birds just disappeared with the trackers and never came back. I panicked because I thought I lost all my data and I had no project. And under pressure, I had to problem solve my way out of it. So I developed a new question. I asked, what are the birds eating when they go out to the ocean? And the only logical way for me to actually answer this question was to collect bird feces. So as you can see, I ended up collecting about 110 samples of Arctic seabird fecal matter by catching the birds, holding them on a notebook, and waiting until they gave me my samples. Effectively saving my project. So I came out of this experience with my life completely changed. I came out of the field thinking I visited one of the most pristine places on the planet, and I thought it was a place that humans couldn't have possibly messed up or tarnished. But upon getting back to society, I learned that the adult birds that summer had actually been getting plastics from the ocean and feeding it to their chicks. I was devastated, because this was really a pivotal point in my career where I realized that if I was going to be this marine biologist and problem solver, I really wanted to help solve an issue that was greater than myself, like plastic pollution. Now, in NatGeo's issue, Planet or Plastic, this problem is put into perspective, and we're shown the iceberg of the environmental dilemma that we're all facing. Since the 1950s, we have been mass producing this material, and for over 70 years, it's been accumulating in our oceans. They've been acting like a sink. It's gotten to the point where every ocean on the planet contains plastic, including the distant shorelines of beaches that are thousands of miles away from human settlements. Now, we're only beginning to understand the harm that plastics can cause animals. Animals can get trapped and entangled in plastics, and if they eat plastics, it can take up space in their stomachs, preventing them from getting the nutrients they need to survive. But most notably, when plastics are adrift in the ocean, they can act like a sponge and absorb harmful chemicals, and that when eaten by any animals, they can be passed on. And there's even speculation this can move up the food chain to humans. but we don't know the answers yet. Now, plastic is an incredibly mobile material. It can readily change environments. And an example that's resonated with me was back in 2012 in Granada, Spain. A dead sperm whale washed up on the shores, and when biologists checked to see what was inside their stomach, they found the contents of a literal greenhouse. There were landscapes and flower pots, and also garden hoses. It was all there. Now, I haven't experienced a dead whale with my field work, but I've had that same feeling of awe and then dread a few months ago when I was doing beach cleanups with my colleagues in Newfoundland. I was walking down the beach and I saw a pile of litter, and I smiled because there was plant growing amongst it. And I thought, wow, life can sustain itself amongst contamination, and I walked on. A few moments later, my colleague tapped me on the shoulder, and holding up the plant to my face, she said, "You missed something." The plant was plastic. The fact that our plastic landscapes we've constructed within our homes, our cities, and our towns have spilled into the marine environment in such a dramatic way should cause alarm amongst all of us. Now, the plastics I've shown you are big and they're identifiable, but this doesn't constitute for the majority of plastics in the ocean. Most of them are actually microplastics, smaller than 5 millimeters in size, and they tend to fragment off of much larger pieces. And as you can see, they're really hard to identify. And without that fundamental knowledge of what the plastics were or where they came from, trying to mitigate plastics from entering the ocean can be a complete nightmare. Now, that being said, my current job is being a plastics detective. I live and research in a place called Newfoundland, Canada, where we're an island the size of California with about 500,000 people. And this is basically where I try to answer these questions of, what kind of plastics are in our oceans and where are they coming from. Now, the thing is Newfoundland's known for its extreme weather. If you look to the picture here, you can see we're all decked out in our winter jackets and our toques, and you might think the fall's not too bad for that, but this is actually our summers. So, yeah, right in the middle of June. So, so my detective work involves going out with my wonderful colleagues every month. We take a little road trip, visit some beaches, and what we do is we clean up the same ones over and over. And what we're doing is we're measuring the amounts and types of plastics that are occurring there. And our basic goal is to try to get this idea of what the plastic personality for every beach is. What's the main type of debris there? Where is it coming from? Is it local or is it foreign sources? But as scientists, we don't always have the answers. So we're quite fortunate to work with communities a lot of the times, and what we do is community beach cleans. And half the time, they're the ones who are schooling us on the type of debris around. So I'm gonna give you some fun examples of Newfoundland garbage. So this, as you can see, is a Tide bottle, or was one. It's all melted and it's burnt up. And this happens a lot in rural communities when waste management facilities aren't readily accessible. People tend to burn their garbage because there's no other option. Now, we find a lot of shotgun shells as well. It's quite common for folks in Newfoundland to hunt to provide for their families, so it's normal. But in this particular instance, we found 1,200 shotgun shells all in one area. And as we were scratching our heads trying to figure out where they came from, all the locals were laughing at us because they're like, "Why are you freaking out? We just had a shooting competition." And it made sense, right? But the most common type of debris that we do find is fishing gear. So this buoy I'm holding is really rare in the sense that it's big and it's intact. But what I want you to focus on is the rope. This rope is what Newfoundlanders describe as sunburnt. It's puffed up and it's frayed off and it fragments really easily. And this is what happens when it's been out in the elements too long and it gets sunburnt, more or less. Now, a really exciting part of our field work was when we were able to make the connection between the sunburnt rope and all the little plastic threads that my colleague's holding. Now, we just don't do our detective work on the land, we also take it to the water, which is exciting. We work with local fishers and we get on their boats, they drive, and we drag this little net-like contraption with us, which is called a surface trawl. And what it does is it collects plastics so that we can measure and analyze them after to see what kind of plastics are in the water. Now, with our detective work, we're quite fortunate that we've integrated a lot of citizen science methods, which means that you don't have to be a traditional scientist to actually do it. So an example of that is the surface trawl that's present in the picture. This was developed by one of our colleagues, Dr. Max Libriel, in her lab Clear. And what it is it's a do-it-yourself design that's available online. Anyone can make it using very simple materials from their local hardware store. And the total cost to actually construct it is about $400, just under, whereas the main industrial scientific model is over $2,000. So another way that we integrate local knowledge in our work is when we work with local fishers, they have a lot of advice for us on where we should be sampling plastics. And instead of being the scientists who come from away and have their ways of doing things, we listen to them because really we're in their backyard and they know it far better than we do. Our last tool that we use is when we do beach cleanups on the shorelines, we use a tool called Marine Debris Tracker app. It's free and downloadable. Anyone in the world can use it, whether you live in cities or near the coastline. And what this app does is it basically allows you to collect data about the types of garbage you're picking up. And what's really useful is it automatically takes your location, your time of collection, and the types of garbage. And all this information automatically goes to an online database that, again, anyone can access. And the significance of having a citizen science database is that as we move forward and we try to mitigate and prevent plastic pollution, we need information where we can start to tease out trends in the types of debris that are occurring worldwide and causes for potential sources. Now, researching plastics requires a lot of problem solving. This issue isn't just restricted to scientists, geniuses, or high-tech equipment, but rather people with a sincere curiosity in trying to understand and how our planet is adapting to this incredible challenge. But curiosity only starts with exposure, and as educators, you have the ability to inspire the next generations of problem solvers and trailblazers. Students need to become leaders in this issue because plastic production is only going up and this material isn't going to go away. By being mindful of how single-use plastics can cause harm to our environment, we can all advocate for impactful changes within our classrooms, institutions, and organizations. Now, despite the immensity of this problem, I'm really hopeful because now, more than any other point in history, are people aware about the harm that plastics can cause. And together, with your commitment to reduce this issue, we can all take a stance to prioritize our planet over plastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So if there's any questions, I can happily take them. If anyone's interested in garbage.
As a part of your
Oh, sorry, where am I looking to?
Sorry.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
As a part of your research, do you guys ever take plastics and then break those down into subcategories based on like density to try and determine, how much of this plastic that we're finding on the shore may be ending up on the seafloor and we're not even able to recognize that amount? Or is there like a way that you categorize the plastics into smaller categories?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. A lot of our methods that we use for like beach cleanups, for example, are based on NOAA protocols. So we kind of slice the beach into different areas, and what we do is, because we know the total area square coverage, we can counter plastics and determine density and approximate a number that's occurring on the overall beach. Within actually subdefining plastics as well, we go into very gruesome detail on all the different categories that we find. So fishing gear, I would say there's probably like 15 different ways you can kind of subcategorize. But again, you kind of have to have an understanding of the local knowledge, understand the type of culture that's behind the garbage, just because like fishing gear gets complicated, for example. So yeah.
This question is related to nothing to do with the plastics. It's the field research. When you were in your isolated cabin, in no middle of nowhere, on the toilet, weren't you worried about polar bears?
That's the first time anyone's asked it, and I'm so glad. I didn't think I would have enough time to mention it or if it would be appropriate. We were actually multitasking when we were on the toilet because we were surrounded by two fjords. There was a potential for polar bears to come on the ice floes on either side. So actually, as we were using the toilet, we had a rifle in our hand. So it wasn't as peaceful as I made it out to be. I know I lied. Yep.
My question isn't quite as interesting, I'm afraid, but how applicable is that citizen science project you mentioned to other marine environments such as rivers or other surface water, specifically inland surface water?
That's a great question. So The way we're doing the surveying, we actually have 7 different sites around around the largest bay in Newfoundland. And what's really great is we picked each site according to different characteristics, how close it is to towns, river flows, current movement. So there's a reason behind every site, and what's really fantastic about it is we can actually narrow down the effects on why certain plastics are ending up there. So we're hoping to use this as a case study specifically for Newfoundland, but by providing long-term data, especially in the subarctic region where people don't tend to do winter work, we can apply it to other places. So I'd be happy to talk about it after, though. Yep. Not currently in North America to my knowledge, but if we talk after, I can definitely shed some light on that. Sorry, they're keeping me to, yep, to go off stage, hey? Yep, sorry guys. All right, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Every day, National Geographic explorers are in the field making discoveries and addressing the environmental issues that are throwing our planet out of balance. We need your help. I'm National Geographic explorer Kukani Katija, and we invite your students to join us in the 2018-2019 National Geographic Geo-Challenge. This multi-leveled, standards-based competition focuses on science and geography. It encourages teams of students in grades 5 through 8 to respond to a critical issue facing our planet today using research, collaboration, and creativity. This year's challenge is tackling plastic. We invite your students to investigate the urgent issue of plastic pollution in our waterways. In order to create a real-world solution to the challenges of plastic waste, your students will practice skills including research, problem solving, teamwork, map making, model building, and video production. We need curious minds to present creative solutions, so register now. You have until January 15th, 2019 to enter your team's submission. Visit natgeoed.org/Geo-Challenge for more details. Help us tackle plastic pollution. We can't wait to see how you will change the world.
So yes,
Please
everybody.
welcome
Kim Hulse, Vice President of Education Programs, National Geographic Society.
Thank you. I was too eager to get you guys to be excited about taking the Geo-Challenge because it's a fantastic program. But first of all, I wanted to thank Justine for that fantastic presentation, wherever she is. It's sharing work like that with students in your classroom that I think is going to make the connection that we're all after and help kids see that they can become explorers themselves. That the way she's so approachable and so down to earth and also so scientific. Somebody earlier today spoke about bringing the humanity back into science, and I think that's where Justine sits. She's brought the humanity back into science, and that's fantastic. Also from the video, you can see that Geo-Challenge is a program that we can really use to put a spotlight on kids solving real-world problems. We've had some amazing results from kids doing Geo-Challenge last year, and it will really restore your faith in humanity at how these kids think about solving problems. So if anyone wants to learn more about the Geo-Challenge, you can find staff members out after the program, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it. Our goal is to engage the power of educators to turn students into the next planetary stewards. You've heard that a lot tonight, the next planetary stewards. We're looking for educators who take risks, who think differently, and who challenge themselves and others around them to push the boundaries of what is possible. You've seen some of those educators on stage already, and you're about to get a real treat because you're going to see 4 more of them. These educators really bring the learning framework that Vicki talked about. They bring it to life in their classrooms in really amazing and inspiring ways. And they are growing this explorer mindset in their kids. So I'm going to introduce you to the 4 educators. They are each going to speak a little bit about their work, and then they're going to take part in a panel
and I'm also going to introduce you to our panelists. And after the panel, there will be some time for questions, so be thinking about what you might want to ask them. So our superstars tonight are SHAREE Barton, who is a 4th grade teacher from the rural community of Rexburg, Idaho. She's a National Geographic certified educator. She's also one of our regional Geo-Challenge coordinators. Joining us from Connecticut is Leon TYNES. He's the technology department head at the, wait for it, really long name, New Haven Public Schools Engineering and Science University Magnet School. And he's a 2017 Grosvenor Teacher Fellow. I know there's a lot of GTFs in the audience there. From Illinois, we will hear from Peg KEINER. She's the Director of Innovation at the GEMS World Academy in Chicago. She's a Global Goal Ambassador for the United Nations Association Chicago chapter. She's a Google Earth education expert and a 2017 Grosvenor Teacher Fellow. And then lastly, but not leastly, we will hear from Jim Bentley, who teaches 6th grade at Elk Grove in California. He is a National Geographic certified educator. He's also a national faculty member for the Buck Institute for Education and a teacher ambassador for the California Education and the Environment Initiative. So 4 stellar educators, and then I'm very happy to introduce our moderator, Laura Meckler. She's a national education writer for the Washington Post. There she covers national trends, federal policy, and the education department. She came to the Post from the Wall Street Journal, and she joins us here for the first time tonight, and we are very excited to have her on stage. So, without further ado, our first superstar educator, SHAREE Barton. Come on out.
Hello. After leaving National Geographic 2017 Summer Institute for Educators in Washington, D.C., right here, where explorers have walked these halls for decades, my mind was racing on the possibilities of projects that my students would drive me down. And I knew that we were in a small rural farming community, and I wasn't quite sure where we were headed, but I couldn't wait to meet my new students because I knew they would help me figure it out. In the fall, I presented the geo-inquiry project that I thought would be a great idea. I thought, wouldn't kids love riding around town on their bikes, and we could map out our bike paths and find out where there were safe bike paths and not safe bike paths, how they connected, and where we needed to go. But guess what? I had very little spark. I knew that geo-inquiry had to be a topic that my students were into. We needed passion, because that goes with the territory. After a few other failed topics that I presented, I decided to put geo-inquiry on the back shelf and just move forward with my 4th grade curriculum. As we started studying Idaho geography, my students noticed the significant amount of waterways that we have in Idaho, and they started asking real, authentic questions. And as soon as we put the connection together that we realized that oceans had a lot of plastic pollution, and we were connected to the ocean, all of a sudden I had desire, passion, and drive. I knew we were on our way, because when the mind sees, the heart starts. After collecting data and finding some workable solutions that we thought that we could do in our community, Skip the Bag, Save the Sea was born, our geo-inquiry project. Students felt that it was probably impossible to get all of Rexburg to stop using plastics, but they did have a passionate argument for a community using less single-use plastics and using reusable grocery bags. At first, the idea that they had was they wanted to change legislation in Rexburg, and then we found out that Idaho has a preemptive law that we cannot change legislation locally about plastic bag or plastic containers. Well, some people might see this as a roadblock, but my students, they just thought, well, how do you make a law and how do you change a law? So our local Senator Brent Hill was invited in, and he informed them about lawmaking. And next thing you knew it, our geo-inquiry process involved more curriculum, persuasive letter writing. And my students wrote letters with such fervor and zeal that I just was so impressed. Skip the Bag, Save the Sea, and a need to change that preemptive law was communicated to every legislator in Idaho. Well, you can imagine the eruption that happened in my classroom the day that we heard back from 2 representatives that they were going to write a bill to try and change that preemptive law. In my 30 years of teaching, I do not think that I have watched students be as empowered as that day. It was so exciting. So with our fingers crossed about legislation, we decided to direct our attention to our local efforts. Data was started to be collected about single-use plastics in the different stores in our community, and we were watching that plastic bag cycle. My students created specific presentations for each store when they found out the processes that each store had and what they didn't have. As we left that day to go present to the different stores, one of my students, Lucas, came up to me and he said, "Mrs. Barton, I feel important." "Lucas, why do you feel important?" "Because we're doing important things and people are listening." Individual challenges were extended to each of the stores, and every store made at least one or more major change because of the suggestions of my students. My students' effort, vision, and passion were validated. We wanted to share reusable bags in our community of Rexburg. So through a school-wide campaign, our students collected over 300 gently used t-shirts and sewed them into bags. They visited the grocery stores and met customers and explained to them the harm of plastic bags and gave them a free reusable t-shirt bag. They were so enthusiastic, though, that occasionally I had to remind them to not attack the customers with their zeal. You know that your project was a success when one of your students goes to his mom's Christmas party and asks, "Mom, where is your big boss?" And on meeting the big boss, the first thing he does is whip out one of his Skip the Bag, Save the Sea business cards and hands it to him and says, "Sir, what are you doing to use less plastics?" You know your students have taken the message of conservation to heart when I receive all kinds of reusable bags for presents. My most recent came from New Zealand last week. A student of mine went there on vacation and brought me back a reusable bag. And just a few days ago, one of my last year's students came up to me and said, Mrs. Barton, I always like to make my own Halloween costumes. Guess what I'm going to be this year?" You guessed it. A favorite educator of mine, Dr. Margot Long, once told me, "Culture is better than any strategy for achievement." Geo-inquiry unrolls a culture of innovation. Allowing authentic student choice in the classroom creates a culture that is personal and passionate, a powerful combination for affecting change. At the beginning of last year's Geo-inquiry project, I could not have even imagined that our classroom, over 800 miles away from the ocean, would be involved in a project so strongly connected to the sea. In the end, it doesn't matter what geographic lens you use to create your Geo-inquiry project. What matters is that the students experience the power of their ideas, the energy of their actions, and foster a keen awareness to their connection to the earth. I'm so grateful to National Geographic and to Geo-inquiry for transforming our school year and empowering my students. These young people are only 10 years old, but they understand that local actions have global impact. They are passionate about saving marine life through this campaign, and they develop the attitudes, skills, and knowledge that they need to be planetary stewards. They give me hope for the future, and I'm very proud to be their teacher. Thank you.
My students are innovators, inventors, and filmmakers. While teaching students core STEM concepts, I'm teaching them how to make a difference. Our school has a very rigorous academic portfolio, but my class is a little different. We do it in a different way. I challenge them to find their voice and connect with an audience in two different ways. We participate in very difficult science fair activities, and also we attach filmmaking along with that. One of the student science fair projects that we did in the past involved designing an in-vessel composter inside of a reclaimed dumpster as on-site organic waste management. This solution is an alternative to collecting and driving waste trucks from 70 to 100 miles outside of a city to different processing plants. A second group developed a modular rainwater, dew, and fog collection system with sprinklers and reservoirs to quickly mitigate known wildfire zones. When we researched this idea, there were only a few mitigation protocols that effectively addressed the spread of wildfires, particularly in California. Their solution was the only sustainable system that captured and released reclaimed water automatically. The third project involved the use of several different electronic output modules, such as haptic sensors, to replicate a mother's vital signs to combat neonatal abstinence syndrome. This inexpensive hardware add-on to current incubators is driven by a miniature computer and could have global impact on the quality of neonatal care in any environment across the world. For every one of these science projects, I required them to create short videos with a website that illustrate the problem that they're trying to solve, as well as connect with their key audience. Building something that has the capacity to change the way we do things and the way we function as a society is engineering. But I'm also teaching them digital storytelling and how to use media to make all the difference. Engineering and STEM students don't always perceive themselves as natural storytellers, and natural storytellers do not always have extensive STEM backgrounds. Our young innovators must be able to use digital media to tell the stories about the ideation and development of their projects and illustrate the viability of those projects. When it comes to filmmaking, getting behind the camera is actually the last part. It's not as important as preparing to film. The students learn the entire film development process in my class, but we have a way of making sure that we do it in an impactful way. We identify problems with evidence, describe the solutions, and then illustrate the solutions using different types of media. If we start with the problem, if we start with the solution, no one will empathize with the problem. So we always start with making sure we address the problem first and showing how impactful this problem is and how relevant it is in our society. I have one last story to tell, of course. And it's actually about me. As you've heard some of my colleagues, I had the experience of going to the Galapagos as a 2017 Grosvenor Teacher Fellow. Yes, thank you. And it was stunning. One of the things I learned is to be patient with nature and let it reveal itself, because all I did was take photos and videos for my student projects. In fact, I collected over 200 hours of video and over 6,500 photos for my students. Yeah, that was a lot of work. So I returned with a charge for my students. Help me review, organize, and figure out what we're going to do next. They asked probing questions such as, what does a tortoise bone look like? And how is a goat an invasive species? But the question remained, what are we going to do with all this footage? And what do you want to do? They came up with several ideas. One group made a video about the state of education in Santa Cruz. Another group decided to create a visual story visually comparing land animals and water-based animals. And the last one we did was the investigation of the decline of the blue-footed boobies in the archipelago. The students Skyped with conservation professionals from the region to discuss what the video should look like and what critical elements are required to maintain authentic and accurate representations of the region. Not only did they create projects for my classroom, they actually had an impact. They raised awareness through participation in different film festivals to a lot of the issues in the Galapagos region. My students understand the power of storytelling to serve a purpose. We use filmmaking and science fairs to prototype, learn, and inform others. They are the creative thinkers and the problem solvers that we need in the world today. When we empower them and we help them find their voice, when we give them the freedom to think beyond scripted problems, they create empathetic and passionate films with a very strong call to action. When they come into my class, as long as they have a plan, I allow them to go for it. And they go far beyond my wildest expectations. Now it is my great pleasure to show you some samples that came from my classroom over the last year.
Our solution is a dumpster. But inside the dumpster is a compact in-vessel composter. The first stage is a JWC shredder that shreds meat, bone, and anything else down to centimeter cubes. Then, the food waste is fed into a cylindrical vessel where the waste is agitated, tumbled, and heated for 24 to 48 hours.
Here at Vicentians, we work to replicate the mother's vital signs and biofeedback using biomimicry. The babies will experience every facet of the maternal environment, from the mother singing to the blue light of the womb, preventing neonatal jaundice. Our product uses Raspberry Pi circuit board computers and Python programming to operate the various aspects of creating this design. We mimic cardiac activity, temperature controls, and all 5 senses. We use haptic feedback to replicate the heartbeat, and an inflatable bag along with the motor to simulate breathing patterns. Our product will include a speaker to play the mother's voice, modified with a low-pass filter.
The Galapagos is a beautiful archipelago 600 miles off the west coast of Ecuador. There is one animal that tourists love to see. Sula nabuxi, or better known as the blue-footed booby, is a famous resident of the Galapagos.
Thank you.
In 2017, I had the opportunity to explore Antarctica as a National Geographic and Lindblad Expeditions Grosvenor Teacher Fellow. I spent months preparing with my preschool through 10th grade students as they generated questions and information that they wanted me to collect from the Great White Continent. I returned with a deep need to share the realities of our changing planet and to create opportunities for students to take action. In Antarctica, I collected animal photos, audio, 360 images, but when I started to present to my students, the #1 thing that they wanted to see was photos of me. At first, I was confused, but this was the moment that I uncovered the connection between students and their explorer identity. Although they empathized with the animals and were curious about the ecology, it was only through seeing me that they started to see themselves as explorers. After this startling discovery, I re-edited all of my 360 footage to include myself so they could see how I was interacting with the environment. My students needed to see a person to provide a model on how humans and nature should interact in our interconnected world. My memories became their memories when they saw me in the field. Students will still stop and talk to me in the hallway about my expedition. My oldest students wanted to know about my next project. My middle year students want to hear specific details of my expedition. And my youngest learners, well, they want to talk about what was the most shocking part of the journey for them. Truly, there were audible gasps in the audience when I announced, there are no snacks in Antarctica. Brace yourselves. This was one of those epic, derailing moments. You know the kind. Educators call them the teachable moment. I stopped my presentation and I listened to their questions. They were worried about where they would eat and where they would sleep. And I could tell how much they connected to my experience because their questions revealed that they were already imagining their own day-to-day life in Antarctica. Students said, well, you don't have to bring snacks because, you could pick up something at the store, right? They lacked the context around this wild, remote location. They wanted to know why snacks and stores and hotels were allowed in our town, but not in Antarctica. When we share stories of exploration, we often overlook these basic details. We jump to the discoveries, but the most introductory elements of a journey are the entry points for students to see themselves in the story. The lack of snacks in Antarctica led us to a deeper conversation about waste, the Antarctic Treaty, and the rules that we make to protect pristine locations. We compared explorer Enrique Esala's work, 360-degree images of pristine locations, to images that other Grosvenor Teacher Fellows took in Arctic Svalbard of plastic that they had found. Students wanted to know, how does the waste hurt animals? And they were shocked and saddened to understand the severity of the issue. This conversation launched them into their own investigation about waste at our school and in our community. My kindergartners immediately wanted to take action, and there were no shortage of ideas. These young students took over our recycling program and started collecting classroom bins each week. They noticed that certain classrooms were contaminating the recycling bins. So they created tools to reteach their peers how to sort items properly. Next, we went to the grocery store and examined the numbers and the packaging of products to collect data on which items were actually recyclable in Chicago. Now, a little background. Waste has historically been an issue in our city. A recent study showed that less than 9% of Chicago's recycling is actually recycled. Students memorized the few numbers that can be recycled in our single stream system. They wanted to find out the most sustainable options at the grocery store, but what we discovered was that it was incredibly challenging to find food that was not wrapped in plastic. They would get excited to see cardboard and then discover that there's a non-recyclable plastic bag inside. The work was hard, but they were tenacious. Now that we knew about our recycling problem and the lack of sustainable options, I wanted to provide space for my students to share. We hosted an event for students to present to the public about what they discovered during their waste unit. They challenged adults to generate new ideas and new ways of encouraging other citizens to make more sustainable choices. Students passionately shared their work because they understood that local action has global impact. I have one final story to share with you. I'm lucky to have a unique role at my school where I work with students of all ages, from preschool through 10th grade. And with our 3rd grade students, there was a lot of excitement about my expedition to Antarctica. And I wanted to continue to provide access to inspiring agents of change. So I connected them with NatGeo's Explorer Classroom. During these chats, students engage and explore in other classrooms around the world in a video chat. They listen and ask questions live. Even the adults in the room are at the edge of their seats during this session, because this is why this matters. When you have your question answered by a professional, your curiosity is validated. When we invite students to these conversations, they begin to see that explorer as a part of their circle. Within minutes, this person's profession and passion become part of that student's realm of possibility. Suddenly, they start to think, maybe I could do that. Even months after students chatted with explorers, they referred to them by name as if they had been old friends. My expedition was a catalyst that helped me understand that we must act with urgency. It made me recognize the need to create ways for students to engage in these important conversations. I found out that my students did not necessarily need me to be the most spectacular photographer or scientist, but a conduit to see themselves as a person who can make change, as a person who could do the extraordinary. When they saw me in photos, they saw themselves as explorers. When we provide entry points for meaningful connection, students can ground themselves in global issues. When we provide them access to professionals in the field, we expand their perception of possibility. I encourage you all to foster the explorer identities of the young people in your lives and help them see that exploration and positive impact is within reach.
Good evening. I'm Jim Bentley, and I would like to tell you a story. And when I'm done, I'm going to ask each of you to make a commitment. When I first started teaching, I'm not going to lie, I struggled. I was trying to imitate the teachers that I had known in school. I thought I always had to be in control. I had to teach everything. I had to know all of the answers. But I realize now that teaching initially was more about me than it was about my students' questions. Something was off. I wasn't fulfilled as a teacher, and I'm pretty sure those first few years of classes, those kids weren't loving it either. So I realized that I'd failed to consider teaching through my students' eyes. I was letting fear of failure govern how I ran a classroom, and honestly, I needed to know more about the art and science of teaching. Now, I wish I could have found National Geographic 22 years ago when I began my journey to deep teaching, but instead I found an organization called the Center for Civic Education and a program called Project Citizen, and that's going to be important in just a moment. This program claimed it could teach kids how to identify a public policy issue and then work with lawmakers to make real differences in their community. After a week, I was in. Our first project began when we looked at trying to use grant money to build a running track at our aging school. This is Eddie and Matt. They were part of that group. Our State Department of Education wouldn't let us do this, and this project was messy. It was confusing. There were no clear-cut answers. There was no textbook to which we could turn, and this was something that really blew me away. A student with a radical idea was the problem-solving solution. Why not trade categorical for non-categorical funds? Students created a presentation. They met with their budget director and superintendent. They proposed the idea of swapping funds, and then they were denied. But when students informed them that they were going to take their proposal to the school board, our superintendent amended the master plan, redirected $2 million of bond money, and built not one but 17 tracks at 17 old schools, many in impoverished neighborhoods serving students of color. Fifth graders did that, 10-year-olds. This is my new formula for learning. Now, how does this connect to National Geographic? 2 years ago, National Geographic asked me to help them develop what's called the geo-inquiry process. They collaborated with me to prove that it could actually work in a classroom, and they also worked with the Center for Civic Education, the group I just mentioned. They worked with the Buck Institute for Education, the leaders in project-based learning, and they worked with Esri, the masters of all things GIS. So I'm happy to say that geo-inquiry works, and not only does it work, it changes students' lives. This is Jocelyn, my student. Last year, she was a shy, quiet student. Her parents were Nicaraguan and Puerto Rican immigrants. I watched her transform into a confident, empowered student over the course of a year as she and classmates tackled a geo-inquiry question where they asked, how can we make water more accessible while reducing plastic waste in our parks and schools? The project was inspired by our study of marine plastics and also after reading a book called A Long Walk to Water, which looks at water scarcity in South Sudan. Students surveyed businesses and stores in our community asking if a non-paying customer could get a free drink of water. They went to parks searching for water sources. This map that we built using Survey 123 and an Esri map, the red dots show water fountains across 97 parks scattered throughout our community. We don't have a water scarcity problem. But what we didn't find was revealing. not one single water bottle filling station. So a solution presented itself by analyzing geospatial data. If we want to reduce the plastic waste generated by single-use disposable bottles, we need more bottle filling stations. Students created a presentation. They spoke to school district officials and park and rec officials, and the answer was ultimately, yes, we'll do that. 6th grade students were empowered to make a difference in their community, but also in their world. Projects like this empower students. They transform them. School is no longer a place where things are done to them to learn. It's a place where they want to come to try to overcome what may have seemed previously impossible, just like National Geographic explorers. Which brings me to the commitment I would ask each of you to make tonight. This is a simple representation of the design process. And it seems for too long now, the goal of education has been to simplify the messiness and complexity of deep learning. But I would ask you, or say to you, that if we teach the way we've always taught, we're going to get the results we've always got. Our world is not the same anymore. It's different. And it demands something different. So what I would ask each of you to do is not demand more from your education system, demand different. Demand project-based learning opportunities like geo-inquiry from your state boards of education, your superintendents, your school boards. Encourage teachers to teach differently and support them as they go through this challenging time of teaching differently and adjusting to new ways. After 22 years in the classroom, I can confidently say that I fail forward with every single project we do. But I have learned to embrace the chaos of learning because I now know that when my students or I struggle, it's not because of what's wrong. It's because of what's missing. And it's not about improving, because that implies a deficit. It's about growing. That's how we learn. Today's students, they did not create the challenges that we face in this world. But I am confident that with outstanding teachers and innovative organizations like National Geographic, which is dedicated to a planet in balance, today's students are the ones who will have the solutions, the attitudes, the skills, the knowledge that we all need. Thank you.
Hi, Miss Ellison's class. Mrs. Corniel's class.
Hi, Mrs. Dema's class. Hi, everyone. I'm Miss Seki's class.
Hi, Mrs. Bergen's class.
My 2nd grade class had the opportunity to learn about an emerging explorer doing some groundbreaking things in their field, and then create a project around what they're doing and their mission.
They were innately mesmerized by this from the start.
I was just very touched and flattered by the great job that you guys did.
We were watching the video, and then when it was over, he walked in the door. We were mind blown.
She walked in and everything went quiet. I am not dreaming. This is real. I'm eating Hindu.
They make a project describing me and what I'm doing to help my community, fighting to protect environment, fighting to protect rights of peoples.
And share with me what advice you can give me and what we can do together.
The 2nd grade students made an amazing animation.
Hi, I am Dr. Ryan Carney.
What they did was basically illustrate my life, starting from when I was a child, and it was extraordinarily cute and touching.
Typically, 8- and 9-year-olds idolize celebrities, and they now, I think, see someone that is a change maker.
Students love to connect with real people. And I think the students really appreciate knowing that these real people are heroes that they can grow up to be.
She was fighting for stuff that we want to happen, like we want to stop climate change, we want to spread indigenous knowledge, and we want girls to get an education. His career is so different. Like the punk rock band, and then an artist, and then a paleontologist. Yep. So we have to pay attention. Yeah, and we have to be curious.
It was remarkable to see how, for the first time, my class is thinking of themselves as explorers, as well as problem solvers.
If you got near the river, there's probably a lot of water under the ground. It'll also be another good place to put a well.
One of the kids said, Hindu never give up. I think each of us, we need to hear this word. They are the next leaders, decision makers, and they will change the world.
We are so in awe of these teachers, but also know that this is just the tip of the iceberg of educators in schools and after-school programs and more, who are rethinking their approaches to inspire the next generation of planetary stewards. Let me extend my thanks to all of you for coming tonight. But we have a real ask of you. Please stay in touch with us. Help us figure out how to get our resources to the field and to help shape new resources to meet the needs of your networks and classrooms. We are committed to making a difference for students today and our planet for the future. I can't think of a better conclusion to our program than to welcome one of our country's great educators and leaders. Ángel Cabrera serves on the Board of Trustees of the National Geographic Society and is the president of George Mason University, the largest and most diverse public university in Virginia, with more than 37,000 students from 130 countries. Ángel is the co-author of Being Global, How to Think, Act, and Lead in a Transformed World, published by Harvard Business Review. He was named a Global Leader for Tomorrow by the World Economic Forum, and the Carnegie Corporation of New York named him to its 2017 class of great immigrants. We are honored to have him here tonight. Please welcome Dr. Ángel Cabrera.
Thank you, and just a short farewell, but let me start by expressing my admiration to the educators, the teachers today, not just for leading the way, not just for absolutely these magnificent experiences, but for the way and the time they've spent in telling those stories. And I fully agree, those stories need to be heard around the world, and I know a lot of work went into getting those stories told that well. The world is listening, the world is paying attention. It's no longer a few champions in a few schools. It's no longer just the NatGeo. International organizations are finally waking up to the notion that we need to educate students to understand the world, to connect with others, to understand how different parts of the world perceive the world and how they're affected by it, to make things happen on a global scale. One of those organizations, by the way, is the OECD, the organization in charge for the, I guess in some places, infamous PISA framework. And they have added, as some of you know, they have added global competence as one of their dimensions. They're going to start measuring it. So it is likely that that pressure may actually make it to school districts and to your own schools, and you would no longer have to be the loners in that quest. The PISA Global Competency Framework is clear. Learning to participate in interconnected, complex, and diverse societies is no longer a luxury, but a pressing necessity. During my career, I've had a chance to, and great luck to meet a number of great global leaders, some of them involved with National Geographic right now, and spent a lot of time investigating and trying to understand what is it that any individual needs to be a global leader, to try to affect the type of change that our educators wish to see in their students. And in a nutshell, these global leaders have the ability to connect with individuals and institutions that are different from their own, to create and figure out new solutions, just like the students we've seen today, and to ultimately contribute to a better place, to a planet in balance, as the mission of National Geographic states. And doing some of that research, we came across a surprising individual who we hadn't thought would be a source of insight for our book in global leadership, especially in a business setting, and that was the Dalai Lama. We invited the Dalai Lama to our business school. People were surprised. What does a Buddhist monk have to teach business school students? And actually, the answer was a lot. And the Dalai Lama basically taught us that maybe the learning outcomes we're after are Buddhist learning outcomes. And he explained it this way. He says, Buddhism has a couple of two core tenets. Number one is the notion that we're all interconnected, that what happens to you affects me, that prosperity of one city, one region, one nation actually is tied to the prosperity of others. And just like your body is all interconnected, and if your pinky hurts or your toe hurts, your entire self feels bad. In the world, if one people, one place, one city, one region hurts, the rest of us will hurt. That's tenet number one. The second one is, if you believe tenet number one, is that it makes total rational sense that you show compassion and care and concern for what happens not just to you and to your close family or neighborhood, but what happens to people around the world. And it is that combination of having an understanding of the interconnection between all of us, and then having the care and the concern and the motivation to doing something about it, even when these are things that may not affect your most immediate neighborhood. It is that combination that will create real global citizens. I cannot think of a better framework, of a better way, and of a better age to start teaching those concepts than in the schools with the frameworks that you are applying. I really congratulate all of you for applying geo-inquiry and really leading the way in trying to show us a better way to do education. I invite all of you to join us in this mission to create a planet in balance. We are all connected, and living here, we have the opportunity to act on those connections and make a difference for young people. Thank you all very much.